St. Jude,
pray for us.
Lady of Victory,
pray for us.
Lady of Sorrows,
pray for us.
Lady of the Christians,
pray for us.
St. Ignatius,
pray for us.
So then, do here a little. I guess the next stage of dealing with the people, the Archbishop Ambrose situation is do a catechism and a consideration of. There's an opportunity to do with the catechetical approach next. So if we're going to do with you guys, the catechism on the situation of Archbishop Ambrose, with the canon law, what the dogmatic and moral theology has to say about the bishops, and then also the what do you call it? And then it's bearing in our situation, and then we'll have a little discussion or whatever afterwards. But I just lay out some of the points concerning, the situation here with the consecration of the bishop, and then also some of the apparent parallels that seem to be there, the similarities between our situation now and the situation in the 80s for Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X in the old days. But in any case, the first thing is with regard to the I forgot that paper. You got my backpack. With regard to the, what's the rule about consecration of a bishop? The issue we're dealing with here is we need a bishop to do the ordinations, also potentially the confirmations, but of course primarily, of course, the ordinations in order to continue the Catholic priesthood. And what are the requirements of the Church for the bishop to do ordinations and confirmations? And what's the law and rule of the Church about ordinations and confirmations? So I kind of mentioned some of those points in the, in the talk a few weeks ago, but that was more of a call to repentance and more of a dealing with kind of the spiritual side of the gossip that's kind of floating around. But now we're going to see that here we're going to consider not so much the gossip that's floating around, even though it has to be dealt with, but what's the situation of the consecration of bishops and ordination of priests in the Catholic Church. And so obviously in order to continue the Catholic Church, you need priests and you need the priesthood. And the high priest is the bishop who passes on ordination and confirmation. And so where this has become an issue for us is that we actually, since the seminarians started, we have a first case of an actual bishop who's willing to try to help us, right? And so that kind of brings it to the fore, because before the Bishop Ambrose came on the scene, it was kind of a non-issue in the sense that it would seem clear to me, for instance, that it's very obvious that we have to do the work of the continuation of the Society of St. Pius X. We have to continue the work of Archbishop Lefebvre, preparing priests the priesthood in an independent seminary. That is just like Archbishop Lefebvre started an independent seminary, that's going to be teaching the Catholic faith, and then when the priests get ordained, they'll still operate independently of modernist organizations. So just the exact same idea that Archbishop Lefebvre had in his vision in Dakar when he realized, as Superior General of the Society of St. Pius X, of the Holy Ghost Fathers, that it wasn't enough to establish a seminary, not enough to establish a seminary or good men. But in order for them to be able to function, they had to be independent of modernist hierarchy. He was a Superior General of the Holy Ghost Fathers, and he could easily have pulled out 6 or 10 really solid, traditional Catholic, anti-modernist Holy Ghost Father priests and established a seminary. He could easily have done that, and then if he did that, then he would have made them their own little bitty subgroup within the Holy Ghost Fathers, and they would function wherever the Holy Ghost Fathers function. But he realized that even though he was Superior General, after 12 years, his Superior Generalship would cease. And not only that, but the crisis of the Church would not cease. He also realized that they would probably get worse in the next 12 years, not better. And then he realized also that the Holy Ghost Father is a missionary order which only works with those people that are of the Holy Ghost Fathers. Whereas the crisis of the church is a global crisis, and there will be many people who need the Catholic faith, who are being trained by modernists or underneath modernist priests, who will not be able to function if there isn't if there's not just a seminary producing solidly trained priests. Because in 1962 there were still seminaries producing solidly trained priests. There were still some of those seminaries around throughout the world with good professors still teaching in the old way, being anti-modernist. But the big problem was when they would be ordained, they would be under the local superiors. They'd be incorporated in the regular dioceses, and they would not be able to do any kind of stable work preserving the faith. And you could foresee the St. Athanasius situation where, being driven out of the church, we have to operate independently. And so in 2012, after many discussions with Bishop Williamson especially, he was kind of my spiritual director at the time, and at the many conversations we had about this crisis in the society, and we're beginning to notice that there's a change of faith, a change of spirit in the priests of the society, and that if there isn't a turning around in the general chapter of 2012, we needed to establish this independent seminary, maintaining fidelity to Archbishop Lefebvre by the fall of 2012, as in immediately. And of course, the bishop said, we discussed it many times, yes, true, yes. And Bishop Williamson should be the rector. And yes, of course. He always, now I think back, he always said, yes, in principle. You know, but of course, that turned out, obviously, he didn't do those things. So that we had to maintain, because it's necessary to continue the work of the society, which means we need to have priests who are validly ordained, who are going to be Catholic priests professing the Catholic faith, but they must be operating independently so that they can respond to the call of the faithful wherever the faithful call. Because the practical charism of the SSPX is a global missionary society, which is, and there are many global missionary societies, we're not the only one, all missionary societies are global theoretically, but what's specific about us is that we have to be able to operate independently of the local bishops. And that's what makes us different from the other dioceses, the other religious orders, because we're going to be going into dioceses where bishops and priests are not going to be happy. And why are we going to go there? Because of the prices of faith. Now we're in 2012. We find ourselves in a very similar situation. That now the priests who are conservative or maintaining the faith, they're only localized. And the people that need that faith are all over. And so therefore there's a need to continue exactly what Archbishop Lefebvre did, independent seminary, and continue the work. So that we discussed that multiple times, and when we have to do it. 2012 we tried to start. Bishop Williamson did not accept to not only did he not come to the seminary, but in 2012 he didn't step out of the society. What do you call it? And we weren't ready. It was too quick because I was officially expelled October the 3rd, 2012. There was still some hope that not be expelled. October is the time to begin the seminary. So then it determined, all right, 2013 is the next year. We're going to start the seminary by 2013, no matter what. And during the year 2012, 2013, primarily going around the world speaking with priests, speaking with the faithful, and their primary purpose was to establish this seminary. And that it needed to be done, no matter what the adverse circumstances, it had to be done. And then finally in October 2013, we started the seminary. And then it became clear that Bishop Williamson, who was supposed to be our bishop to do the ordinations, he's told me in the very, very beginning, because I asked him, okay, we're going to have the seminary is going to start in October, and, you know, can you come next year in February the 2nd and do the blessing of the cassocks and the tonsure? And he said, well, no, I may not come for the tonsure, and I may not come for anything. So he told me that back in 2012, or back in 2013, before the seminary started, and tried to encourage me, of course, to not start the seminary. And I said, because I don't think it's a time for seminaries. You can't make seminaries now. I said, well, the seminary has to be established. Bishop Williamson refuses, and he made it clear that he did come and bless the seminary when we started October 2013. He visited, but even though he visited and blessed the seminary, you know, was he here for? He was there like 3 or 4 days. I think it wasn't a full week, was it? 3 or 4 days or something. Just a few days he was here, it wasn't a full week. And it was his second visit. First visit he came in 2012, right after he was expelled from the society. We had a conference here, and then the second visit was 2013, and he blessed the seminary. So he refused, and I didn't worry about it. And I remember we had a priest retreat, and I told Bishop Williamson, says, look, you're the only pebble on the, you're the only bishop. You're the only one. We have only these 4 bishops. You're the only one standing for the truth. And he said, I'm not the only pebble on the beach. I said, yes, you are, and you know you are. Because there aren't any other bishops in the world that are valid bishops that aren't sede vicandos or whatever, and who are going to be able to come forward and help us. You're the only one. You were one of these 4 bishops. He says, no, 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 no. I'm not the only one. And so we continue the seminary. And they said, I'm not worried about it. God will provide in his own due time. In 2015, the Archbishop Williamson then opened up his public attack against us. That's when he kind of opened up his public attack, was 2015. He had been working underneath, trying to get every seminarian to leave the seminary, trying to get anybody who wanted to be a sister or a nun to not become a sister or a nun, trying to shut things down before they can get started, when we went around to the parishes, I always traveled with Bishop Williamson because I knew that at each parish he would tell people to leave, and he would tell them to go back to society, and I knew exactly what he was doing. So I traveled with him and smiled, and whenever he talked to somebody and said leave, I'd tell him stay. And then and then there was the one case in St. Mary's, Kansas, where he was saying something about the new mass being good, and a guy in the back excuse me, we had about 75 or 80 people there at that conference. He goes, excuse me, Bishop, but did you just say that the new mass was okay? Bishop Williamson began to respond. I was standing on the side, and I knew exactly what he was going to say. It was going to be the same crap that he said in 2015, 2 years later. So when he started to respond, I immediately responded for him. And said, the new mass is straight from hell, it's evil, and intrinsically evil, and it's not just secondarily bad. And the Bishop Williamson went, he pointed to me and made gestures, and then we went on to the next question. Because I knew that he was going to pull out, and I said, if he pulls this stuff out, I'm going to have to attack him right then and there. So I didn't really want to do that. And so I answered for him. I just answered right for him. And then the, what do you call it, because it was trying to avoid any kind of a public conflict. So anyway, 2015, though, he really opened up, actually with the, put away your toys, and, he opened up on a public attack because they were trying to shut down the seminary. And at that same time was when Archbishop Ambrose appeared on the scene. And so it just shortly before that, but it was that same summer that he appeared on the scene. And it says, I want to meet with Bishop Williamson, I want to meet with you guys, I like what you're doing. My name is Archbishop Ambrose, and I'm in Colorado, so I called him up, and I thought he was just another one of these not bishops or whatever. But I called him up, and he seemed very unusually knowledgeable for, bishops or priests that came from the what do you call it, the non-seminaries, like the Took-line bishops and all that, who never went to a seminary, never studied, don't know anything. And then, so they did an investigation, went and visited him, and then the crisis arose at the very end of October, the very end of September, right before the seminarians came, right? It was the end of September, just before the seminary started. Father Voigt sent out his letter that I'm a thief, and then was there Constance sent her letter out about whatever, that was later. Yeah, just a little bit later. And then what do you call it? But it was it was the same time, because when he left for you guys. That's when he sent it out. That's right. No, I mean he sent his letter out, but not her, right? And he said we have to keep these young men from coming to the seminary, and then the accusations against Paul the Mexican, accusations against myself, accusations about Bishop Ambrose, and it was occasioned by my father, by Greg Taylor, putting out a notice that said that Bishop Williamson has a pedophile priest with him, in Father Abraham in Broadstairs, and that the faithful tried to ask him to quietly not let him continue to come and say the masses. The priest put him off the circuit, and he said no, he's not going to do that. After speaking to him several times and trying to get him to quietly do something about it, he's not, so he made a notice, public notice. Within 6 hours or 10 hours of that notice, immediately all the vomit came. Because Bishop Ambrose did visit here September the 13th weekend, and there was basically, he said Mass, it was in the summertime, he said Mass, and gave his little talk about it, Bishop Ambrose, and came from here and there and so on, and then there was nothing really happened. There was no fuffle or no anything. But once the 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks later, when Greg Taylor put out that notice, there was an immediate massive explosion. Then, so he continued the investigation of Archbishop Ambrose and so on, and what brought it to an end in 2015 made it very clear that there's no issue of being able to work with Archbishop Ambrose was when he decided to canonically direct the seminary. Canonically direct the seminary. Remember, he did that on a private mass that we had. It was the day of the wedding of my nephew. So I left for the wedding. Father Hugo had to leave for the circuit, and then Bishop Ambrose left for Colorado. And so my brother, Father Tim, was in Colorado. The wedding was in Colorado with my nephew, my oldest nephew, Joseph, being married. And then he said a private mass, but it was the only mass that the seminarians, I'm not very seminarian went to, but some seminarians went to it because it wasn't a scheduled mass. And one of them was Martin, who decided to film it and then put it on the internet. And then also, and so he says, and that he wanted us to be under his jurisdiction. And I said, no, we can't do that. We cannot accept being under jurisdiction, because that would be accepting a parallel hierarchy, which we don't accept. Remember, the bishop comes in and does ordinations, and even when our bishops do ordinations, it's just an auxiliary bishop providing a valid ordination. So when I was ordained by Bishop Fillet, Father Schmidberger was the superior of the Society of St. Pius X, and when I knelt down and put my hands in the hands of Bishop Fillet, I said, do you promise obedience to your superiors? Because he was not my superior. He was just a bishop. Who was doing the ordination. And just like now, they'll switch back to that again. Now that Father Bagliarani is the superior, when he does the ordination, he'll say, will you promise obedience to your superiors, your legitimate superiors within your religious congregation. When every priest is ordained, no priest is allowed to be ordained who is a vagus, who is a vagrant priest. And what I found interesting about that particular issue is that the ORCM back in the 1970s, father of, what's his name of the son, Lady of the Sun, Father LeBlanc in Phoenix, and many other priests tried to create a seminary for independent young men. And there has been an attempt to do that, at least in the United States, multiple times, and I'm sure it's been done in other places ever since Vatican II. And all of the attempts failed. The idea was that Father Ringrose, Father LeBlanc, all these priests running independent chapels would have one of their young men from their parish go to the seminary. They would study in the seminary. After they'd be ordained, they would not be a member of any religious order or congregation. They would simply come back to the parish where they were, and then when the old priest died, would take his place. In this way, they would continue the priesthood like an arranged parish priest. And there was a great desire to do that all throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it completely failed. Nowhere did it succeed. Only the Society of St. Pius X, or religious order, succeeded in making, okay, we're going to make seminarians who are going to be priests. When you become a priest, you can't just be a validly ordained priest, but you need to have a function. You need to belong to a religious order. So, so when here we didn't have the bishop, we still don't have the bishop to this day, but we have, whenever you get ordained, it's to be of the Society of Pius X Marian Corps. Did you get Father?
Yes, focus.
Did you get him?
I didn't see him.
Yeah, we'll go grab because he said he wanted to come up, so. You bring him around the outside. He might have got confused. But you can get him, yeah. The Society of Marian Corps. So in any case, so with regard to the Code of Canon Law, was required for the making of valid Catholic bishop. And it's really relatively simple. Any valid bishop, any bishop who has the power of orders, whether he believes in God, or whether he is Catholic in good standing, or whether he is suspended, interdicted, or excommunicated, whether he is an apostate, a schismatic, or a heretic. The only other possibility is dead. So that's any kind of living bishop is going to fit in one of those 7 categories. A Catholic bishop in good standing, and that is where our bishops stand, by the way, the bishops of the society. They are Catholic bishops in good standing. They're called suspended or excommunicated, but that's actually not correct because they're not really suspended or excommunicated. But so they're actually fit in the category of Catholic bishop in good standing. However, so Catholic bishop in good standing or truly suspended, that's legitimately suspended, because if it's illegitimate, you fit in category 1. Truly interdicted, forbidden to offer any sacrament. Suspended means, suspended and interdict are very similar to one another. Suspended is they're suspended from the use of their sacraments. Interdicted, I think they're even interdicted where they can't receive a Catholic burial. I think it just goes a little bit further. I believe it's the case of interdict. And then excommunication, which practically is similar to suspension and interdict, just more serious. So that they're excommunicated bishop, a truly excommunicated bishop or priest, and then an apostate, one who was Catholic and left the Catholic faith. Schismatic, one who essentially theoretically has the same faith but is separated from the church, and it's rare that that is only a schismatic, because most schismatics are also heretics. And then lastly, the heretic. Whenever a bishop of one of those 6 categories, or a bishop who's in good standing but does not get permission from Rome to it doesn't get permission to to consecrate. Then he would be also in trouble, right? So in any case, so the code of canon law here that so first, one who is excommunicated is prohibited from confecting and administering illicitly the sacraments and sacramentals, except for the exceptions that follow. And then that's canon 2261. So one who's excommunicated or is not supposed to offer the sacraments, except, paragraph number 2, the faithful with due regard for the prescriptions in paragraph 3 can, for any just cause, seek the sacraments and sacramentals from one excommunicated, especially if other ministers are lacking. And then the one who is excommunicate and approached can administer these sacraments and is under no obligation of inquiring the reasons for the one requesting. And so that when there is an excommunication, a really excommunicated bishop or really excommunicated priest, if the faithful ask him for the sacraments, he can give it. Assuming he's truly excommunicated. If he's not excommunicated, well, then it's a non-issue, right? That's why we say with our priests and bishops of the Society of St. Pius X, priests are not our priests. We are not suspended, even though we're said to be suspended. The bishops are not excommunicated, even though they were claimed to be excommunicated. But even if they were, the faithful could ask them for the sacraments. But from a banned excommunicate, that is, that's the excommunicatus vitandus, and other excommunicates after a condemnatory or declaratory sentence has come, then only the faithful can ask in the danger of death. So if there is someone who's nominatim, named excommunicated, then that person who is, we call vitandus excommunicated, then the faithful can only ask the sacraments of him in the danger of death. An excommunicated who's excommunicated but he's not vitandus, the faithful can ask the sacraments from him, and they don't even have to have a reason. They just ask, and the excommunicated priest or bishop can administer the sacraments. That would apply for confirmation and also for baptism and confirmation and holy orders as well. Now then, with regard to the law of the church on the where is it here? The excommunication, Canon 2370, who's changed to an excommunication. A bishop consecrated another bishop, and the assistant bishop, or in the place of bishops, priests, and those who receive consecrations without an apostolic mandate against the prescriptions of Canon 953 are by law suspended in the apostolic see unless the apostolic see dispenses them. And that's Canon 2370. That's the old law that says that if you consecrate a bishop, you're suspended. Pius XII changed that to an excommunication. So that's the famous change into an excommunication in 1951 and then 1955. And this is the canon that's in question here. So that the bishop who's consecrated or the priest who's ordained, the priest is suspended, the bishop also excommunicated if there's a consecration or it applies to Bishop Ambrose, if he was consecrated by any one of those 6 unapproved bishops, then he would be considered excommunicated, according to the new legislation, because of a violation of the Title VI. And so putting together the titles of the, because this is important for us in the Society of St. Pius X, that we recognize that in 1988, our 4 bishops are consecrated without permission of Rome, and they were accused of being, we were immediately accused of being in schism. And what's interesting about this particular situation with Archbishop Ambrose is that we're also accused of being in schism. And that this accusation we should be familiar with, that you know, they're accused of being in schism for consecrating a bishop without the permission of Rome. So when you talk about the consecration of a bishop, John Paul II vaguely says in Ecclesia Dei Afflicta, the schismatic act. And of course he claims it's a schismatic act, when according to the law of the church, the consecration of a bishop without permission of Rome, and remember, as far as the church is concerned, you've got those 6 possibilities, so it doesn't matter which one, actually a 7th possibility, that is an approved bishop doing it without approval, or suspended, interdicted, excommunicated bishop, or apostate, schismatic, or heretical bishop. All of those, any one of those, when they do it, there is a punishment of excommunication created by Pius XII, and before that, in the history of the last 2,000 years, suspension. And then you have Canon 2372, just afterwards, by the way, which says that they incur upon the fact a suspension from ad divinis, this is from, you know, from saying Mass and so on, reserve the Apostolic See, who presume to receive orders from one excommunicated or suspended or interdicted after declaratory or condemnatory sentence, or from a notorious apostate, heretic, or schismatic. But whoever in good faith was ordained by such a one as these lacks the exercise of the orders received until he is dispensed. So you got Canon 2372, just 2 codes later, that says that if a priest receives ordination from one of these excommunicated or suspended, all those 7 categories, if he receives, he has himself a punishment. He is suspended out of divinis to reserve the Apostolic See. But if he does it in good faith, then he does not receive that penalty. He is not suspended out of divinis. He just simply should not exercise his order until he has been dispensed. And according to Woywood in the Code of Canon Law commentary, that's whenever a bishop gives him an assignment. So he doesn't have to do a suspension, but just give him an assignment. An example in history is St. Athanasius, St. John Chrysostom, and that when they left their diocese because they were thrown out, and other saints thrown out of their diocese, they were thrown out multiple times. St. John Chrysostom was, St. Athanasius was. When they were thrown out of the diocese, heretical bishops took their place. Arian bishops or Nestorian bishops took their place, and then those bishops ordained priests in their absence. When the bishops came back, St. Athanasius was restored to his see, or St. John Chrysostom was restored to his see. They did not reordain, or absolve, or reassign those priests. They simply continued as Catholic priests in the diocese. St. Augustine, you know, he has a good quote about that. St. Augustine says that they left, if we can find it here, St. Augustine talks about the fact that in his condemning of the Donatists, that they left worthy of punishment. The union makes them corrected, you know, and that so there was no issue. Remember, multiple times in the church from the very beginning, the early precursors of the Orthodox, which are now the Orthodox, we call them by one name, Nestorians, Monophysites, they consecrated bishops without you don't need the permission of Rome, of course, in those days, but the permission of the Metropolitan, of the other Catholic bishops. Consecrated bishops without permission, consecrated bishops who were heretical, consecrated bishops that were schismatic, And there was no, when the church came back to its senses, they just simply functioned as bishops, functioned as priests. And that's been the practice of the church for basically 2,000 years. And it explains why the penalty of consecrating a bishop or ordaining a priest without permission is in Title VI, which means it's not very important amongst the titles. So the penalties and delicts, that are condemned by the church. Title I is on delicts against the faith and the unity of the church. And then Title II on delicts or penalties, crimes against religion. Title III on delicts against ecclesiastical authorities, persons, and things. And I think this is where you attack the reputation of a bishop, or you attack a bishop or attack a priest, and so on. On delicts against ecclesiastical authorities, persons, and things, desecrating a church. On delicts against life, liberty, property, good reputation, and good morals. And so that's Title IV. So these are all, and they're more serious crimes than ordaining a bishop or ordaining a priest without permission. And then Title V on the crime of falsehood. And I think that's with regard to accusing a priest of, that's a crime specifically where a woman accuses a priest of impurity in the confessional and she's lying. And of course the priest can't defend himself because of the seal of the confessional. And so, and then also I think it may also refer to the falsehood in court, but I think it's primarily the crime of falsehood as regard to violations of the confessional on the part of the faithful. And that and then Title VI on delicts in the administration and the reception of orders and the other sacraments. And this is the one we're dealing with here. So that's Title VI. So the other 5 titles, one of which is destroying the reputation of another, destroying churches, sins against churches. You'll notice that all the most serious delicts against these other crimes, these other sins, these other penalties or other crimes in the church, they don't make one cease to be Catholic. They receive a punishment, and then it depends upon the degree of the crime. And so when we arrive at Title VI, and I think it's interesting about the history of Title VI is that it brings up a really big question of why did Pope Pius XII make an excommunication for a crime that's listed number, say, 60 or 65. So you got the most serious crimes, and crime number 60 gets an excommunication. But the 30 or 40 crimes above it have almost no excommunications. 50 of the crimes above it have no excommunications. Why did they add an excommunication there? And I think it's going to be, we can say that the reason for the addition of the excommunication for the consecration of bishop is specifically because of Vatican II. That had to be the reason. It's not because of the communists in China, it's because of the communists in Rome. So that when the excommunication, lay it to the level of excommunication, why do that? Because of the fear that when Vatican II comes into play, that there will be bishops who will stand up against Vatican II and will consecrate priests who are not heretics, priests that are not in favor of the liberal garbage going on in the council, and they'll only be suspended. And so they'll only get a slap on the wrist, and these bishops will end up being a massive headache. So therefore, there is an addition of an excommunication. Reading one of the Latin canon lawyers, Capello, I think it was, Capello, or another guy with a C, he said, the excommunication of Pius XII does not apply to the consecration of a bishop who's an auxiliary bishop. So, in other words, according to them, the excommunication wouldn't even apply to the 4 bishops consecrated by Archbishop of the Fed. The excommunication could only apply to a bishop who's being consecrated in order to take on jurisdiction and a diocese, and this is what makes the penalty excommunicable. Because it's absurd to excommunicate somebody just for consecrating a bishop, or for ordaining a priest. Ordaining a priest is suspension, consecrating a bishop is excommunication. But it's absurd to do that because there's no proportion between the punishment and the crime. And he said the reason that therefore the punishment only applies when a bishop is consecrating another bishop who is going to take on jurisdiction. Auxiliary bishops, if a bishop was a consecrated bishop, priest of bishop without jurisdiction, the excommunication of Pius XII would not apply. I think that's Capello or Colo, it's something, I think it's Capello, but it may not be Capello, but it's but somebody with a C, a canon lawyer, Coley or something, in commenting on that code of 1955. As it was 51 and repeated in 55. So what happens if an excommunicated apostate bishop ordains a Catholic priest or any priest to the episcopacy? What happens is, if he doesn't do it, if he does it in good faith, there's no excommunication, no penalty. If he does it in bad faith, there's excommunication, but the excommunication does not affect anyone else. Remember, it's one of the points we made when we look at the consecration of Archbishop Lefebvre. He consecrated 4 bishops without the permission of Rome. What should have happened from the Roman perspective, if they were honest, in July the 2nd or 1988 was, we declare that Archbishop Lefebvre, Bishop de Castro-Meyer, Bishop Williamson, Bishop Bissier, Bishop de Galarreta, and Bishop Fillet are excommunicated for consecrated bishops without permission. That's it. One paragraph. That's it. That's all that could legally be done and morally be done. But what was done? What was done is that they're excommunicated for violating the code, Canon 2370, and violating code Canon 2370, the old code, and whatever the number is in the new code, because it says the same thing. And this schism means we're going to establish the Ecclesia Dei Commission, and this schism. So they say that, wait, but there's no schism. When a priest is consecrated by a bishop without permission, even if it's an apostate, schismatic, or heretical bishop, and maybe you can get them all together at once and cover everything. So it could be an apostate, schismatic, and heretic, so that it can, the best of all worlds. And so he's an apostate, schismatic, heretic. If he does the consecration, so in this case Bishop Riore consecrating Bishop Ambrose, that would at the worst case penalty make him receive an excommunication, which would be a personal punishment. And let's find part, because there's a more time finding the quote here, that the punishment is for the minister, not for those that receive sacraments from the minister. I think it's from the Saint Thomas, I think it is, because it's maybe, I don't know if you can find the passage in here, that the punishment is for the minister, not for those who receive from the minister. Because remember, it's an individual punishment. So we used to point out in 1988, they said, if you go to Bishop Williamson's Mass, or if you go to Bishop Fillet's Mass, or if you accept Bishop Williamson and Bishop Fillet, you're excommunicated and you're part of a schism. Number one, excommunication cannot go from person to person, right? Penalties cannot travel from person to person, right? And that if one person has a penalty, it cannot be passed on to someone else. And then also the, so penalties don't travel from person to person. Penalties have to be accepted strictly. So the penalty is applied if you strictly violate the law, then you receive a penalty. If you don't strictly violate the law, you don't receive the penalty. So, and then of course, the penalty of excommunication does not equal schism or heresy or setting against the unity of the church. If it did, the composers of the canon law under St. Pius X and Gregory and Benedict the 15th, they knew what the crimes were. They would have put it under Title I, as we mentioned multiple times in the defense of Archbishop Lefebvre. There is no schism. It's impossible to even consider a schism. Even if you really believe that these 4 bishops or these 6 bishops are excommunicated, that punishment only applies to them. You can even have your kids confirmed by them. You can even do that according to canon law. So that even if you firmly believe that these 6 bishops are excommunicated, even though you're wrong, they're not excommunicated, but supposing they really were, according to the Code of Canon Law, any of the faithful can ask the sacraments of the excommunicated, and that means they can receive them. So what is the worst case scenario of an apostate, a schismatic, or a heretical bishop consecrating another priest to the episcopacy? Personal punishment for that person, and nothing more. Punishment does not pass to others. Secondly, when the consecration takes place, suppose that an apostate atheist consecrates a priest, he doesn't make the guy an atheist. If he's a Catholic that consecrates a priest, he doesn't make the guy Catholic, because now we have Catholic bishops who have tried to ordain women, and we have Catholic bishops who have ordained non-Catholics. It's happened since Vatican II. They've done it secretly, but they've done it. There have been Catholic bishops that have ordained non-Catholics to the priesthood and may have ordained them to the episcopacy. Now, that ordination obviously is illegitimate, and they would be excommunicated for doing that, legitimately excommunicated for doing that, because they obviously didn't have a good reason to do it, and it's wrong. But that their ordination would neither make the ordinand a Catholic or make him a non-Catholic. The ordination is a sacrament. There's an indelible mark on the soul, and it's a sacrament instituted by Christ. And as St. Thomas Aquinas says in the Summa, Christ is the number one. He's the principal minister of the sacrament, and the priest is only a secondary minister. He's just a secondary minister. So all he has to do is intend to carry the message. It's just like a messenger who has a sealed message. He doesn't have to agree with the message. Like, remember in the case of Hamlet, he was carrying a message, and the message said, execute Hamlet, right? He didn't know that. He didn't know that. Of course, he opened the message and kind of made an adjustment to the message to execute the guys who were execute the other guys. But you're made to carry a message. You don't know what the message says. You don't believe in the message. You don't like the message. You're just carrying the message. When you deliver the message, it's delivered. And when you find out the message is they're going to kill you, that stinks. But you are simply intending to carry the message. You carry the message. You deliver the message. It's delivered. And so that you don't have to believe in the message. You don't have to like the message. You don't have to. You just simply carry it. And that's what's required for a bishop or a layman or to administer a sacrament, because laymen can administer the sacrament of baptism. And so that when they administer the sacrament of baptism, like in 1887, there are some bishops here in America who said that Methodist baptisms are invalid, because Methodists do not believe in removing original sin. They don't believe in the doctrine of baptism. They think baptism is just a nice little fluffy ceremony. And it's in the doctrine of the Methodists. Methodists don't believe in baptism. They do not have the Catholic belief in baptism. So how can a Methodist minister who publicly and knowingly does not believe in baptism, how can he be a minister of baptism? So it's invalid. So the case was sent to Rome, 1887. Rome responded saying, no, Methodist baptisms are valid, period. You cannot conditionally re-baptize. You only take a Methodist convert and make him make a profession of faith, because the minister of the sacrament is Christ, not the Methodist minister. And when the Methodist or the atheist or the Jew or the pagan or the Catholic, the father of the child, when they pour water over the heads of the baby, they're saying the words of the church, I baptize thee in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and they're pouring the water over the head, and the baby is baptized by Christ through the secondary ministration of that minister. The ministers do not need to have faith. They do not need to believe in the sacrament. And this came up again in the Archbishop Lefebvre case, because many people have claimed that the Archbishop Lefebvre and all the priests that come from him, like myself, Father Hugo, Father Giselle, were all invalid priests. I learned again last night that there's a family of several 10 or 15 people there in Canada who went 15, 20 years ago. They left because of the fact that Archbishop Lefebvre was not a priest. And I got 20 people over in Malaysia. They left because Archbishop Lefebvre was not a priest. And we empirically run across people who decided Archbishop Lefebvre was not a priest because Cardinal Lionheart ordained him without the intention to do what the church does. So, with regard to the minimum requirements of the church to make a valid sacrament, minister, applies sacrament, and tends to say the prayers. That's it. And he's not making a mockery of those prayers. The only way to invalidate by intention is to play the Mass, or to play the baptism. That is to make an external mockery of it. And St. Thomas Aquinas points out it must be an external thing. He's playing. He's playing. He's not doing the sacrament, he's playing the sacrament. Like when I was a kid and played Mass. If I was secretly ordained when I was a baby, I wouldn't have known that. But if I was secretly when I was a baby, I would be truly a valid priest. But when I was 6 years old and playing Mass, it wouldn't make Christ present. because I was playing Mass. I wasn't intending to say Mass. I was just playing Mass. So the sacrament is necessarily valid if the matter and form are applied by the minister intentionally. In other words, he intends to do it, not doing it in his sleep. And he's not mocking the sacrament. It's a free will human act. He doesn't have to believe in the sacrament, doesn't have faith, etc. So and the church did that about the Methodists in 1887, and then of course many times about the Orthodox and the others. It's interesting. It's in My Catholic Faith Catechism. They're on page 335 of the My Catholic Faith Catechism on the duties and obligations of a priest. That Catholics know that all of the heretical bishops of the heretical churches, except the Anglicans, because the Anglicans are clearly invalid, because Apostolic Curia says they're invalid by Leo XIII, but the Orthodox, I think it's got his listed Polish National Church, and the Old Catholics, the Jansenists, they have valid priests, valid bishops, and continue apostolic succession. And in the danger of death, any Catholic can call on an Orthodox priest to anoint him, hear his confession, and bring him also viaticum. So the sacraments can be received by them. And in many cases in the history of the church, one recent case is that Costa in 1945, he started his own religion. He basically was a communist in Brazil, and he blew the whistle on the Pope Pius XII letting Nazis escape into South America. And so Costa consecrated at least 3 bishops. He may have consecrated more. He started his own church, and it's called the Apostolic Church of Brazil, and he consecrated 3 bishops while he did that. And two of the bishops came back to the Catholic Church. I don't know if they joined his religion or just got themselves consecrated by him. And there were 2 bishops received at Vatican II. There were 2 of the bishops at Vatican II. And so they were consecrated by Costa, and then came back to the Catholic Church. They just want to be bishops, so they got themselves consecrated bishop. They came back, and they were accepted, and they were bishops at the council. And then another bishop just got consecrated by Costa, and he remained he went to England, and he's like the bishop that and he's the bishop who consecrated a lot of a lot of the non-sedevacantist bishops floating out there, so that the church would not question their ordination, their consecration, and then they were received back into the church, and never do they reordain the ones that are received back into the church. So with regard to the faithful, if a faithful receives a sacrament from a excommunicated bishop or priest, if there is legitimate reason, then there's no problem. If they have good faith, if there is legitimate reason, there's no problem. If there's common error, like Canon 202 of the Old Code, there's no problem. And if they do it wrongly, there's a problem, and they shouldn't do that. But there's no actual canonical penalty for that. And so now we apply the codes there to the situation of Archbishop Ambrose. What do we know certain about Archbishop Ambrose? And that's not a matter of the dispute. And that is, number one, of course, that he was baptized, at the Church of Nativity in New York City in 1949, shortly after his birth, as a Catholic in the Roman Rite. So he's baptized Catholic in the Roman Rite. And then, of course, he went to Catholic seminaries, as part of New Jersey, and he went to the Catholic Minor Seminary in New York. And he also did his 3 years of teaching, like the Jesuits do. They have to do several years of teaching before they get ordained. He did that teaching in an Incarnation School as a seminarian, as a brother in Long Island, New York. He did it for 3 years, the appropriate time, 70 to 73. And then shortly afterwards was ordained a priest. And when he was ordained a priest by Bishop Ilnitsky in 1974. And Bishop Ilnitsky is a bishop of the autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church of America, of the USA. And when he ordained Father William Moran in the Catholic chapel there in Long Island, he ordained him as a Catholic priest. And he functioned as a Catholic priest under Bishop Boretsky, and we have the letters in file of the Eparchy of Toronto, that he, with certainty, that he was a priest of the diocese, incarnated in the Diocese of Toronto for 2 years. But this is one thing Tony Rosa can't understand. It says a temporary incarnation is not an incarnation, but of course it is. In the Code of Canon Law, when a priest transfers one diocese to another, he has to be incarnated from the moment he's ordained, and then he can be incarnated in another diocese. They can receive him for a trial period. When they receive him as incarnated in the diocese, but with the right to remove him later on. But that is not normally, that's only done by a revocation. If there's no revocation, he's incarnated. It's also interesting, as our case in the Society of St. Pius X, because the SSPX was approved in 1970 provisionally. This is, our enemies make that note all the time, that it was a provisional, temporary approval for only 5 years as a pious association, the Society of St. Pius X. And, you know, we're just a pious association. We're just a pious association. Father Roberts likes, bringing that one up. You know, pious association. We're not pious. And so that part doesn't apply. You know, it's not a pious association. And yet, in 1972, a priest here in Kentucky, Father Urban Snyder, he was incarnated by Rome into the Society of St. Pius X. He had to get a special approval from Rome. The reason why he had to get a special approval from Rome is because Father Urban Snyder from Kentucky, he's one of the priests that lives here on the property, one of the priests who raised me. He's one of only 2 priests who were incarnated in the SSPX in the entire world. One of them happens to be from here, from this place. And the other priest is a French priest. I don't know him, but I know Father Urban Snyder. And he was incarnated in 1972 in the SSPX with the approval of Rome. Why did it have to be done? Because Father Urban Snyder is a Trappist monk. The SSPX is a religious congregation. And according to the law of the church, you can't go down. So you can go from congregation to monk, but you can't go from monk to congregation. Therefore, in order for Father Urban Snyder to be incarnated in the SSPX under Archbishop Lefebvre, he had to receive a special permission, indult, from Rome, which he received in 1972. And then he was incarnated into the Society of St. Pius X, which means, according to Rome in 1972, that temporary, so-called temporary approval of the SSPX was an approval of the SSPX. It's like a standard way to approve of things. You know, it's like when you read in the Bible, you know, we remember doing the book of Daniel with Bishop Williams, and he says, you know, Daniel comes and says, "O King, live forever." What does that mean? It means hi. How you say hi to a king, right? Does it mean the king is going to live forever? No, it's just that's the way you greet a king. It makes him feel good. And so it's just, all it means is hi. It's just a procedure, right? "O King, live forever. O King, live forever. O King, live forever." And so likewise, when you receive someone into an organization, you receive them first temporarily. How many organizations do that? Every single organization in the Catholic Church. One of them is called the Society of St. Pius X. When you take your promises on December the 8th, you're going to be received temporarily into the Society of St. Pius X. And according to canon law, if you never renew them, like you're supposed to, but you stick around, guess what? You're still in the Society of St. Pius X, and you have the responsibility, the Society of St. Pius has the responsibility to take care of you. And that's clear in canon law because of the fact that bishops love dumping priests. It's one of the things that they like to do. Bishops have always liked to dump priests. And so as a protection for the priest, the church says, you give a temporary approval to a priest, fine. Unless you publicly or clearly revoke that permission and expel him, that temporary permission equals permanent. And that's basic canon law, right? Basic canon law. And the reason is because of the problem of the, so in the case of Archbishop Ambrose, when he was Father William Moran, incarnated into the Diocese of the Eparchy, of the Catholic Eparchy of Toronto, he's a Catholic priest. And you only have to be incarnated for 1 minute to be clearly a Catholic priest. He'll also function certainly as a Catholic of the Diocese of Toronto. We've got the letters Archbishop Ambrose. You can help out in the various parishes wherever needed. You can stay in New York City in America and help wherever needed. Fine. So that's what he did. He functioned only in Catholic priests, Ruthenian and other places, the Eastern Rite Catholic churches, and then you get to the 1976. 1976, consecrated bishop. We got two consecrations in 1976. One is the consecration, that's a secret consecration in Rome, and that secret consecration in Rome was the one with Cardinal Schlippe. And this consecration is the one that can't fully seal the verification of. Nonetheless, there's a very solid and good evidence that he really was, consecrated, there in Rome. And one of the, we know for certain that he was truly connected with, with Cardinal Schlippe. And there is because of the recent discovery, actually, of Tony La Rosa, who wrote to the, Santa Sofia in Rome, and the church where Cardinal Schlippe was, and in the response to this response, 2015, he wrote in, and the priest there said, "We've got no record of any William Moran here in the records. There's no such thing as a consecration or Santa Sofia." Writing back in 2015, let me give you a brief response to your request concerning the presence and the historical archives of the UGOC in Rome of the documents testifying to possible bishop ordination of William Vasily Ambrose Moran by Patriarch Joseph. Checking the main archival funds and cases revealed the complete absence of such documents. So no document of the consecration found in their archival funds as bishop. Moreover, the comparison of signatures of the Beatitude Bishop Joseph and His Excellency Isidore Boretsky from that period with the signatures in the document, quote unquote, sent by you is certified that your document is a falsification and the signatures are false. And so he denies the consecration and the signatures in the consecration certificate. We have found instead a letter from Bishop Boretsky to Patriarch Joseph containing a petition for acceptance under the jurisdiction of the bishop, bishop of the Ukrainian Orthodox Alta-Festivus Church in America, Bishop Mstislav Ilnitsky, and two priests, Ivan Rapke and William Moran, from November 29, 1974. In a draft of the response letter, Patriarch Joseph asked Boretsky to send the original documents and to find out more about the canonical status of the petitioners. So there we have a clear connection of Father William Moran and Bishop Ilnitsky, and it was specifically mentioned to receive Bishop Ilnitsky of the Orthodox Autocephalous Church of America under the jurisdiction of Cardinal Schlippe. So and Cardinal Schlippe says yes. In 1975, I got the newspaper clipping, the actual physical clipping of a newspaper article in 1975 that says, here is Father Rapke, and with him Father William Moran, who are going to Rome for the Holy Year to meet their bishop, And so they established, Father Rapke established a new Catholic parish, a new Ukrainian parish in a school nearby, and so there's a new, and we're looking for help for ladies to join the choir. And that the new newspaper article clipping says in 1975, a few months after this, that Father Rapke and Father William Moran are on their way to Rome to be with their bishop. And the bishop is mentioned here. Who's that bishop? Bishop is Cardinal Schlippe. So that they're under the jurisdiction of Cardinal Schlippe, and that they are accepted under the jurisdiction of Cardinal Schlippe. We'll also have the priest who's with him, Father Rapke. Again, the facts of Father Rapke, in a letter to Father Shirovsky, from Father Shirovsky, November 10th, 2015. Suzanne Romano request him for him. I said, what do you know about Bishop Ambrose? Remember, put up a little website, the Ambrose Moran, whatever it is, .wordpress, a website of pictures and chronological. So she asked him to look at that and see if he recognized anything. And Father Rossi answers, it may well be that William Moran was ordained a priest. Nothing in the documents or photos suggests to me that he was consecrated a Catholic bishop. The photographs and captions are a mixture of the real and the fake. The photo purporting to be taken after his consecration at Santa Sofia in Rome is manifestly doctored picture. Cardinal Juppé would have been falling down to appear at such an angle, simply ridiculous. The photos of Father John Ropke, that's the priest he's listed. So John Ropke is, in these several documents here, may well be authentic. Father Ropke was known to me and served in the St. Josephat Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of Parma, Ohio. In his later years, the photos of the clergy of Toronto include Deacon Chuck Bell, who fancily liked to use the name Constantine Belisarius, which is Bishop Ambrose told me the same thing about that Bell, whatever his name is, Belisarius, and the late Father Sergei Keller, who was a secretary to Bishop Isidore Boretsky and may have been the source of the Archbishop of Toronto letterhead. So we have what is the witness here? These priests. He can verify that the priests in the pictures, at least 3 of them, they are known to him, of the Eparchy of Toronto. One was the secretary of Isidore Boretsky, and they're Catholic. So even though Father Turovsky, who was ordained in 1980, was a bit younger than Bishop Ambrose, he was ordained in 1980 by Cardinal Juppé, so he didn't personally know Archbishop Ambrose, but he knew the same Catholic priests that Ambrose knew. So this is proof that, yeah, these are Catholic priests that are in those photos. Of course, we also verify the churches. We have hundreds of photos, and these photos demonstrate, it's called circumstantial evidence in court, that the Bishop Ambrose as a priest was in all these Catholic parishes celebrating the Catholic Mass for the Catholic faithful. And so it's all showing him to be Catholic. And that's throughout. So then the important revelation of Father Turovsky, and you got that thing, okay.
It's on
the side, okay, fine. So Father Turovsky, it's absurd to claim that William Moran was consecrated in the Church of Santa Sofia. All ordinations, even the priesthood, much less the episcopate, within the borders of the city of Rome must be registered with the Vicariate of Rome. And it's interesting here that Father Turovsky is saying this, and just a couple paragraphs before, he admits that there were 3 secret consecrations. They were not registered with the Vicariate of Rome. In fact, they weren't registered until after around 1991, many years later. They weren't registered with the Vicariate of Rome. And then, but then normal ones are registered with the Vicariate of Rome, ones that are approved by the Pope. These consecrations, these at least 4 consecrations that he missed, and other consecrations done by Cardinal Juppé, no one knows how many, but he did multiple consecrations. They were not approved by Rome. They were not approved by Rome. In fact, you said, Adamowski, that when you were there, you said they said there were many bishops in Ukraine, or several bishops.
They don't really know, but there were secret consecrations. They said that in Ukraine they don't really know who is the real bishop, and even in those days.
Yeah, because there were so many secret. Because he did the secret consecrations, and then of course not only did he do secret consecrations, but remember, under the Iron Curtain there were secret consecrations there. All consecrations were secret. That was like normal. Carlos Juppé himself was consecrated secretly. In fact, they weren't supposed to know that he was a bishop, but the communists, of course, knew. And the second that Bishop Andrew, whatever his name was, the bishop before him died, Slutitsky. As soon as Slutitsky died, immediately they arrested Juppé. So they were supposed to know him only as Father Juppé, but in fact he was already a bishop. He'd already been consecrated secretly, and the communists found out about it. But they didn't arrest him until what's his name? How do you say his name? Slutitsky died, right? So in any case, so here the important revelation here of Father Turovsky is that that is why all married candidates for the priesthood were ordained in the Studite Monastery of Castelgandolfo, not within the city limits of Rome. That is where I was ordained to the priesthood on June 8, 1980. Oh, I see, he's a married priest. On June 8, 1980. I was immediately given an antimensium like that which William Moran has. So this is the key. I was immediately given an antimensium like that which William Moran has. We say Greek corporal, but he had the audacity to scribble his own name on the line reserved for the signature of Cardinal Juppé. He has no way of knowing that. That's just a rash claim. The cardinal's signature is where he usually signed, not on that line because it was too small for his large signature. And so that's the one here, you know, that we have the actual real, you know, the real document here. You can see there's the what do you call that, the coat of arms, Cardinal Juppé, and you see how he signed across. And this is the physical cloth document, 40 or 50 years old, you know, and there's a custom, you know, to give this. This is a definitive proof that the conditional ordination to the priesthood done by Cardinal Juppé was really done by Cardinal Juppé. He gave the certificate. We know that he went to Rome, Father William Moran, and he said that Cardinal Juppé conditionally reordained him, and because that's what he always did, coming from his Eastern, we don't trust anybody background, and him, what did he do? He gave him this exact cloth. I mean, you can see how, you know, it's got the relics, you know, sewed in the back and so on, and that that's the actual signature. And what's interesting to know, that Father Chorosky is a witness, is a very powerful witness because he's against Archbishop Ambrose. He doesn't believe in him. So when a witness is against you, it's in ways much more powerful than your friend, because your friend, he might lie for you. Maybe he isn't, maybe he is. But when your enemy says something, it's a lot more powerful. And here this is, he says, yeah, that is the signature of Cardinal Juppé, that huge signature. He was supposed to sign this little bitty line here, but he didn't. And he signed there and gave this document gave this cloth. This is the actual physical cloth. So this is a lot better than a normal certificate. A normal certificate is actually a copy provided by the, what do you call it? It's a copy provided by the diocese. But that's not what we have, right? Not a copy provided by the diocese. Or it is the church. This is the actual cloth. So that's a definitive proof that Father William Moran was with Isidore Boretsky, 1974, 1975. And then, of course, we have in the Holy Year, 1976, I think it is, in Rome, at the Mass of the, and he said, yeah, there could be a lot of priests were there at that Mass, so he could have been there like many others, and of course he was. We know that he was there. All these point to the fact that what he says about Cardinal Juppé happened to be true. Now, then you have the consecration in Chicago in July of 1976. And that consecration is, again, you know, verified. It's still on the website of Tony La Rosa. You recognize that October the 17th? Anyway, October the 17th, he contacted the cathedral there in Chicago. October the 16th, he consecrated the Holy Protection Cathedral, the wrong one, the Russian one. When he contacted that one, they said, no, there's no Ambrose consecrated here. Then he realized he consecrated the wrong the wrong cathedral, so then he consecrated the correct cathedral, the Ukrainian cathedral. And they said, yes, there are only two bishops, I think, consecrated here, and one of them was Bishop Ambrose Moran Dolgoruki. He was one of the bishops consecrated here. We can verify that the certificate is correct. That's a 1976 certificate of consecration with the 8 bishops in it. And then I also went to meet the priest in charge in Chicago, and he verified that, yes, that it was really and truly consecrated here. And also the father told us that, he told me that he saw several different groups of documents when he went through the archives. One was the certificate of consecration, of course, in 76 by those 8 or 9 bishops. Then the other was a document that's from Bishop Riore, written in Ukrainian, to all those bishops, saying that Father William Moran, Bishop William Moran, was already consecrated earlier that summer by Cardinal Juppé. And he told me about that document. And then the third, there are various documents about the dealings between the various Ukrainian churches trying to unite. Because Bishop Riore, who established his jurisdiction in 1942, and was a Orthodox bishop, a mainline Orthodox bishop, he devoted his whole life to trying to unite the Ukrainian church and separate it from the Russian and Greek churches. And so Cardinal Juppé, he was friends with Cardinal Juppé, and worked with Cardinal Juppé to try to separate his jurisdiction. And that's why one of the priests of his jurisdiction, or bishops of his jurisdiction, Bishop Wilnitsky, would easily be accepted by Cardinal Juppé. And we have it there in the documents of the Santa Sofia, that Cardinal Slupe accepted him. And he accepted him under his jurisdiction. So Father Rabke, Father William Moran, and Bishop Ilnitsky of the Autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church of America. And then, so now when he was consecrated bishop, so he's consecrated bishop, then he was also appointed the Metropolitan in 1983 and successor to Cardinals, to Bishop Riore. And where the question and doubt, where the question or concerns or doubts come in from the people, I think is primarily that the word Orthodox is continually used. It's the Orthodox, Autocephalous Orthodox Church, Autocephalous Orthodox, Autocephalous Orthodox. Well, the Orthodox are not Catholic. But that was the name of the jurisdiction established in 1942. It had divided into two parts. One was in union with Cardinal Slupe, the other one was not. I did discuss with some of the priests there in Chicago, and said of course, this 40 years ago, one of the priests died. There were some few priests that remembered, and so I was one of the main priests to try to meet with. He wasn't there. I met with some of the others, and they said yes, these things. There was all kinds of dealings in the 1970s and early 80s trying to put together, and it just turned into a big disaster. But there were many meetings trying to unite the churches, and the meetings turned out to basically not succeed. And now they're a lot more intelligent, so to speak, because now they work together in 2015 without uniting the churches. They don't want to unite the churches. So they want the Orthodox to stay Orthodox, the Catholic to stay Catholic, and they do their ceremonies together. So they want to act a pure ecumenism. So they know that back then they were trying to unite the churches, but now we don't need to unite the churches anymore because, you know, there's no Vatican II baloney. And then that's it for the essential truths about what's his name, Bishop Ambrose. And then you have the accusations. So you can say with the accusations, the principal accusations, where you got what, the doctored picture of him with Cardinal Slupe. You have they say the changes that appear to be made in the documents, particularly the 1976 document of the consecration in Chicago, because somebody wrote in 1976 and they put the wrong date to June 13th, the Sunday, June 13th, when Sunday wasn't, June 13th wasn't a Sunday that year. They made a mistake in the typing, and so they did a sloppy job of putting that together. Those, in fact, I talked to a lawyer in England, and he says those are actual, we would consider those in court as proofs that it's a legitimate document. Because when you have many people signing the document, they get a secretary to sign it up, to type it up. And the secretary very often screws it up. And remember, in the days before before computers, you had to physically type it in. If they screwed it up, it's really annoying. It's really difficult, especially when you get many people to sign it. It used to happen to me a lot with marriage documents. With the marriage documents, you have the witnesses come in, they sign, and then you put the wrong date, spell the name wrong, and then they all leave. And now you got the wrong information. So what do? You can't go back and get them and get the signatures again. So you cross out, put the correct information in, send it in to the government, because it happens a lot in marriage certificates. You know, and then because you get all the witnesses come in, they sign. You signed on the wrong line, you idiot. You know, they're the ones who are the witnesses. They're not the ones getting married. You know, and so there's all kinds of screw ups that happen. And when you have multiple people signing a document, it's very common, because the document has to be then prepared in advance. Some secretary prepares it. It's quite common to get screwed up. Now it's easy to fix those things. You just, you know, now you can do computer signatures and you can redo the documents. But in those kind of documents, where multiple people sign, those kind of things can happen. Now this document of 1976, it's the document which we know with certainty is a correct document. I've got a copy of the document. And the copy is also on the internet, but that's the document of consecration, which is verified by the priests and the cathedral in Chicago. We verified that document. Now then, the complaint is made, well, I mean, why do they change the signatures? Why this, why that? Well, that's what happens. It happens frequently, actually. And then when I check with some of the signatures of the bishops, there are 3 Catholic bishops in that document. 3 Melkite Catholic bishops, one of which is supposed to be Bishop Joseph Tauville, another one is Bishop Joseph Raya, which are both Catholic bishops. They're old at the time, and they were there. And there were 2 of the other third one. I can't remember his name, Bishop Andreas something, I think. But there were 2. Those 2 I remember their names, and they're Catholic bishops of the Catholic Church present there, and you can see their signatures. one of the commenters that made said, yeah, that's Bishop Joseph Raya's signature, because he was so old, his hand was so bad that someone would have to hold his hand. It was always a messy signature, just like that. And that's the way that Father Bishop Joseph did it, because he was really old at the time of the consecration. Also, we had the priest there told us there's an old lady in the parish that remembers the young bishop being consecrated. You remember the young bishop, the young 27-year-old bishop, who was a royalty, Dogaruki, being consecrated in the cathedral. They remember that bishop. And then, of course, another important circumstantial evidence, which is very important. The main proof that somebody is a priest, the main proof you have is that he dresses like a priest, talks like a priest. Remember the duck, right? Walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, probably a duck. So the main proof you have is the priest himself, and that he functions and is accepted as a priest. Because you know, when we go into churches, I'm Father Bob. Where are you from? I'm from the Diocese of so and so. I'm from the Society of St. Pius X or whatever. Okay, fine. You can say Mass on the side altar. All right. And that they function as priests. When we have charlatan priests, because we dealt with charlatan priests in the 1980s. Usually the charlatan priests were Polish. So whenever we get a priest with a Polish name, you always check. So there, now one of them I served as Mass. I served at a Mass he was at up here in Indiana, and you know, he was a fake priest. He was just coming in. He decided he was traditional. He practiced up the Latin Mass. He heard confessions, said Mass. There were multiples of them in the 1980s, and I think as late as the 90s. They usually would last a few weeks or a month. I do remember that he was a little bit weird. I only saw him one time. But he was, I could tell he was different. He wasn't like Father Wathan. He wasn't like Father Urban. He wasn't like Father O'Connor. He wasn't like Father Hannafin. I recognized that. I was a 16-year-old kid, But, I feel, okay, maybe he's just a little different, I did recognize he wasn't like the other ones. And then he got caught. He didn't last very long. And the reason why it doesn't last very long is because the charlatan priest, they don't know their theology. When you start asking them, where were you? Well, yeah, I was there, man. Yeah. Where? Around, around. So that they can't, and then when you ask them, they can't remember what classes they went to, they can't remember what seminary they went to, they can't remember where they were assigned, they can't remember what they did, and then of course they don't know their theology and faith, they don't communicate correctly, they're very ignorant, and they can maybe get away with it for a few weeks. I've never heard of a case where a charlatan priest got away with it more than a couple of months. If they're really good, they can pull the wool over the eyes of the faithful for a couple of months, get some rupees, and move on to the next situation. And then also charlatans tend to have, they have a proof. This proves I am what I am. They got one proof, and they got one story, and they keep going over that one proof and that one story. Whereas when someone is really a priest, or really a professor, or really a bishop, they don't have just one thing. They have many contacts, they have many things they did, and they don't just have one thing. And that's the case of Archbishop Ambrose. He doesn't just have one thing. We got the hundreds of pictures. I verified, for instance, in 1978, he did confirmations in Texas. The guy is still alive there. He remembers him. They were actually the same age as Archbishop Ambrose. I remember him. He came in, did confirmations in 1978. So that now, if you're a bishop, even if it's a secret bishop in 1976, and it's a secret bishop, so that most people are not supposed to know that he's a bishop, but many do know that he is a bishop, there should be some signs, both of them as functioning as priest and bishop. You should see him as father, and you should see him as bishop. And we do see that. In the 70s, he confirmed, he consecrated, he did confirmations and sacraments in a chapel, the St. Pius V Chapel down there in Texas, and then a couple of other places, mainly for the independent priests, ORCM, and so on. So those things are verified. He also knew the names of the priests. Father Sanborn, Father Kelly. He met with them in the 1970s and described their personalities perfectly, and how they behave and so on, and was rejected by them. He also met with Archbishop Lefebvre. When Bishop Lefebvre was making his visits, and he went to confirmations and met the Archbishop in 1975. I think it was Huntington. It was at a rented place where we have our confirmations. I was a pastor in New York. I know the place. And it was not a church. It was a rented place where we happened to do our sacraments. And how could he know about that rented place? It's a rented place, not a church. He was there. He knew the rented place where the bishop did his confirmations. And where we still sometimes use the place, it's still there. Still there. You know, the American Legion, I think it's Huntington, wherever it is, in Long Island. And so so that in any case, we have it for real that he is. Those are the things that are certain about Archbishop Ambrose. Certainly baptized Catholic. Certainly Catholic priest of the Diocese of Toronto. Certainly consecrated, valid bishop in the Holy Protection Cathedral. Probably consecrated bishop by Cardinal Slupe in Rome. Certainly connected to Cardinal Slupe in Rome as a priest, and probably as bishop. And so the and then of course and today in 2018 he professes the Catholic faith. Made the profession of faith between Father Diego and I, a few years ago that we can publish, and also he hates Vatican II, the new Mass, ecumenism, and so on. So so those are the facts concerning him there. So in any case, then we're going to have a little, well, that's sufficient. Let me go ahead and we'll just simply say a prayer, and then we'll have a little discussion. Glory to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. As it was in the beginning, now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. St. Vincent Ferrer,
Pray for us.
St. Jude,
Pray for us.
St. Victory,
Pray for us.
St. Sorrows,
Pray for us.
Pray
Pray for us.
And then also, excuse me, lastly, I forgot to mention, with regard to the intention, there's a very good point made by St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa. He says there are two ways of corrupting an intention. One is to not intend to do the sacrament. And this is to make a mockery of the sacrament or to play the sacrament. This intention, this would invalidate the sacrament. The other is to not believe in the sacrament or to not believe in what the sacrament does, a lack of faith, and this does not vitiate the sacrament. For just as charity is not required to have a valid sacrament, you don't have to be in the state of grace, a priest can be in the state of mortal sin, so likewise faith is not required to have a valid sacrament. So so that the priest doesn't believe, the sacrament is still valid, and that's the infallible teaching of the Church with regard to the intention is concerned. And then as regards the secondary accusations, wearing a suit and tie, being a charlatan, doctored pictures, those things are not relevant to what matters. What matters is he a valid priest? Is he a valid bishop? Does he profess the faith? There may be explanations for those things. There may not be explanations for some of those things. There may be good explanations, bad explanations, or true explanations for everything. That doesn't matter. Those things are secondary. And so that what matters is valid bishop, professing faith, willing doubt. And if that's the case, what are our obligations and so on. You can go ahead and close that off now. Then we'll